Welcome to the Living Well Pod. I'm Crystal,
I'm Samantha.
and this show is all about discovering peace, freedom, and possibility in the midst of life's health challenges. If you're ready to see beyond your diagnosis and explore the wellness within, you're in the right place, and we're so glad you're here. Hi there, welcome back. Hi, Samantha.
Hi, Crystal.
So today we're going to talk about something that has occurred to me recently. We had been talking about podcast episodes a while back, and one of the possible topics that I brought up was, what if you knew that your gastroparesis either would or wouldn't go away? Would that change anything for you? And that's been kind of floating around in my head. And over the past, I don't know, probably couple of months, I've just been thinking a little bit more about my own health history. And it kind of occurred to me that it's probably likely that my gastroparesis, some level of my gut dysfunction, is a result of having hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a connective tissue disorder. And the thought occurred to me that maybe this is how my body's made. Maybe it's something that I can't fully fix in the way that I wanted to and tried to for so many years. And the interesting thing to me was that that thought felt like a relief. Like it felt like a deep breath to think, oh, maybe this is how my body's made. And obviously, I don't know, right? It's me just kind of putting pieces together and looking back to my childhood and realizing all these signs that I probably had dysmotility from a much younger age than when I was diagnosed. And when I was ultimately diagnosed in my early 20s, it was after a very traumatic medical experience that left me with anxiety and panic attacks, and obviously really were heightening a lot of my physical symptoms. But it was interesting to me that it felt like a relief, not a disappointment.
Mm. And I can understand how it would feel almost like an exhale, having that, I don't know, acknowledgement or realization that maybe this is just how my body is. Because it's like you said, it removes that pressure that there's something wrong, I'm broken, I need to fix myself. And so it's like this ongoing stressful pursuit to try and find the answer and try and find the cure. And you're always trying to be that one step ahead. So it's almost like you're not in the present moment. And that's not to say that you're still not going to do the things that you're currently doing anyway. It's just there's that kind of layer, almost like that gray lightning cloud above your head that's, pelting rain on you. It's almost like that's moved to the side.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me is that if you would have asked me, what's the weather above my head, I wouldn't have said there's a gray lightning cloud, right? I didn't really think I had a lot of thinking about gastroparesis in that way. But the fact that that thought brought relief really showed me that I did. And we've talked
Mm,
about that in past episodes of how your feelings kind of show you your thinking. And so it's really not important whether somebody thinks that their gastroparesis is going to get better or isn't going to get better. I think it's more about what the feelings around that reveal to us about the stories
mm,
that we have about our responsibility, about what it means if we get well or we don't, because we don't know. And I mean, I would never say that, okay, everybody who's diagnosed with gastroparesis should just say, it's never going to go away. And, somehow that improves our experience. I don't believe that's true. I've had plenty of clients with post-viral gastroparesis, idiopathic gastroparesis, who have gotten better. It's not that this doesn't get better or go away. To me, what's more interesting is what your feelings around that reveal about your thinking, which is then really creating the experience that we're having.
Absolutely. And I think probably everybody, I know this is a big generalization, can relate to when you're first diagnosed. And I know it was like it for me, it's all consuming. And so gastroparesis is absolutely at the forefront of our mind, and that's all we're thinking about, and understandably so, because if you're vomiting or you're nauseous all the time or you're in pain and you can't tolerate, liquids or solids, of course it's all consuming because it's impacting your quality of life. It's impacting your ability to do the things that you used to be able to do. And when we have so much thinking about that, then that impacts us physiologically and then it exacerbates those symptoms too. And I'm not saying that our thinking causes the symptoms, but our thinking absolutely contributes to those symptoms being more heightened.
Yeah. And so as you're talking, it's reminding me of the newsletter that I published. What was it? Probably about 2 weeks now as this podcast comes out, talking about the three layers of gastroparesis and how we have the layer one, which is the organic disease. And so that's the delay in gastric emptying. That's maybe for me, the impact of connective tissue issues and laxity in the GI tract and this underlying dysmotility. And then there's layer two, which is the nervous system and the gut brain connection. And so for me, when I was diagnosed soon after a very traumatic incident, that layer two is definitely playing a role because my nervous system is in fight or flight, all the time, amplifying what's going on in level one. And then level three is the thinking that you're talking about, where it's just like, I can't handle this. I can't be okay unless I get rid of this. It's my responsibility to figure this out. Nobody is helping me. And so you can really see how those three layers are not distinct. They all intertwine and amplify and work together. And that base layer, that layer one, is kind of what I'm talking about when I say, okay, maybe this is just the way it is. Like maybe that layer one is just the way it is. And even in saying that, I had a period where my gastric emptying normalized, and there's still flux within all of these layers, including the layer one. But really, for me, is just seeing that layer three is always so active. And that's the part that
Mhm.
I think is so cool. It's like any insight like that can totally change things in a way that is much more accessible, I think, than what most of us do, which is really like dig into that layer one and try to work at the organic disease, which is reasonable and
Mhm.
valuable, and we do need more resources for that. But it keeps being really cool to me every time I see how impactful that layer three can be.
Yeah. You know what I find really interesting is that the belief that we tend to have, that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, that I need to fix this. I need to find a cure. I need this to get better. And feeling like we're responsible for that, which, if we take it that one step further, it's like, well, then do we feel responsible for having caused ourselves to develop gastroparesis?
I think a lot of times it does feel that way. And I
Mm,
think culturally, it's kind of presented that way. I mean, not about gastroparesis in particular, but just like the health and wellness sphere in general is very much like if you're unwell, you're doing something wrong or you're not trying
hmm
hard enough. And I think it's very easy to internalize that to mean, okay, then there is something I could be doing differently. And I think social media really plays into this. There's so much content preying on that insecurity in people that, like, if I am unwell, I am not doing something right. And there's a big difference between what you and I are talking about right now and tools and strategies that help to manage your symptom and address your condition, right? We're not talking about like, don't do anything that helps you feel better. But yeah, I think that's such an important piece of this is the idea that we are somehow responsible for, if not becoming unwell, for staying unwell.
Mm. And I think it's so important to say that people are not responsible for becoming unwell. And for if your gastroparesis remains, if it doesn't resolve itself, that's not your fault either. But because we feel so much responsibility, it totally impacts our experience of living.
And it's not your fault at any of the layers, right? I mean, it's not your fault at the organic disease layer if that condition remains. It's not your fault at the nervous system layer if your nervous system is quote unquote activated or in fight or flight. It's not your fault at the thinking layer if you have a lot of thinking about this being unbearable, about needing to fix it. And I think that's a really important message because in any situation where we're sharing things that might help, I think the really common thing that a brain does is flip that to, well, if I'm not doing that, then, it's my fault. This to me is really a situation of like when you see something differently, you do something differently, right? When you
Mm,
recognize that, oh, how I think about this condition influences how I feel. Okay, well, now I want to pay a little more attention to that. Now I want to look at the
mm,
difference between the actual sensations that I'm getting and the story that my brain is telling about them. And
mm,
so I love that you brought that up because I just think that's such an important piece. And especially, I think for me, where I really got stuck with that was in that kind of layer two, in that nervous system piece, thinking about, well, I struggle with anxiety. And so it's my fault that I keep activating this fight or flight system that's then making my GI tract less efficient and exacerbating my symptoms. And I think I got stuck for a pretty long time in trying to control the layer two piece. And I think, that's kind of the next step to me of this idea that we are responsible is the idea then that we do have control. If we're responsible and we're just not doing the right
mm.
thing, that means we have control over this. We don't, as far as I can see, right? If you
Absolutely.
had control, then you would be controlling it. If there's some layer at which you clearly do not. Um,
Yes. And with layer two and layer three, it's like we don't know what we don't know. And as you've said lots of times, we're doing the best with the thinking that we have. And once we have a little bit more awareness or realization of the impact that our thinking has in terms of bodily sensations, then that just opens up our field of vision.
is this something you've ever thought about? Like, do you think about whether or not your gastroparesis might go away?
In the beginning, absolutely. In the beginning, I felt like if it didn't go away, then what was my life going to be like? And felt that my happiness, my success, the quality of my relationship with my kids, my husband, my social relationships, everything hinged on whether my gastroparesis was there or it wasn't there. It was like black and white until I started having conversations with you, which was like 9 years into my diagnosis, and realizing that my gastroparesis may or may not be there, but I can still live well. And I can still, like, two things, the biggest thing that helped me is knowing that two things can hold true. I can still be in pain, but I can still have moments of joy, which seem completely opposing and nonsensical. But it just means that, yes, my symptoms are there, but at that moment, I am present and the symptoms have taken like a step back from the front of my mind and I'm fully immersed in the experience. And that was game changing for me because even now, I mean, there is so much that I do to be able to be the best physically I can be every single day. But I do it more from a position of, okay, what feels right to do now in this moment? And I'm still symptomatic every single day, but I have so many more moments of joy, and I don't feel right now that my life would be any different whether I did or didn't have gastroparesis, which seems like a really big call to make. And if you said that to me that in 2010, I would be saying that in 2026, I would not have believed you. That's not to say I would love nothing more than my gastroparesis and my psoriatic arthritis to go away. But if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world.
I think to me, it feels like we can want whatever we want. And the real key is knowing that, like, what's going to happen is going to happen. As far as I can tell, you don't control whether or not your gastroparesis and your psoriatic arthritis go away.
Mm,
And so I feel like so much of the difficulty comes in when we feel like we have to change something that we don't have the capability to change. Again, not that we don't have the capability to make things feel better. Not that we don't
mm.
have the capability to use the tools and the strategies and the resources to improve our physical health, to work with our mental health, to really look at and figure out where our experience comes from and have maybe a completely different experience of this, which I think is what you're talking about. But that root idea of this situation has to change, we don't make that change. And I think just seeing that can sometimes really be an aha moment for people.
Can really lighten our experience. Because otherwise, what came into my head was being on a hamster wheel and like constantly going on this wheel and trying to get off. It's almost like we're setting ourselves up to fail, which makes it feel so much heavier.
And what just occurred to me, I don't know that I really thought about this before, but I think part of the relief for me and being like, oh, maybe this is just how my body is, and it's not something I did or something I'm responsible for fixing, is that also for me means it's not my job and my career that I've chosen, because I had this idea for a while that continuing to do this work was, I don't know if this even makes sense to me now, but at the time it was like keeping me stuck in like having gastroparesis because it was really keeping it in my focus. And I watched other people who, at the time that I started creating content and coaching was around 2009, 2010. There were a few other people in the space at that time who had blogs about gastroparesis friendly recipes and traveling with gastroparesis. And we were all on Twitter at that point. And I watched them gradually leave the space and get better and go about a life that had nothing to do with gastroparesis. And there are a couple of them that I still follow over on Instagram, and their life has nothing to do with gastroparesis. And somewhere along the line, I got a story in my head that, this work was kind of keeping me stuck in having this condition. And so I went away for a while. I didn't do this work for a while. I didn't create content. Um, Turns out, still had gastroparesis, didn't really make much of a difference. But I think there was a piece of that too that kind of fell away for me when I was like, no, this is nothing I'm doing. This is not an attention issue, which I do think sometimes gets conflated with the
Mm,
layer three stuff that we talk about, right? How we interpret the condition, what we think about the condition, the stories our brain tells. I think can kind of get conflated with the idea that like, well, you're just paying it too much attention. And if you stop paying attention to it, it'll go away. Like, no, layer one, that organic disease is still there, right? But how we think
Hmm.
about it definitely impacts our experience. And so I just think it's interesting to see how sneaky these stories around like personal responsibility can be when it comes to our condition and how they show up in ways that we might not expect with what we think is our fault.
Mm, I absolutely agree with that.
Feels like a good place to wrap up for today.
I think so.
I hope that was helpful. I want to announce that my Living Well with Gastroparesis program is now available. It is an online, on demand program. It is truly everything I would say to you if we were going to sit down together and have coaching sessions, or if you were a friend and you had just been diagnosed with gastroparesis. I have worked really hard to make it complete, but also concise. And it really does touch on all three of these layers that we talked about today: how to address the organic physical disease, how we work with that gut brain connection and that nervous system component, and the I guess it's the third layer, but to me, it's really the foundation, which is our experience of gastroparesis and our thoughts and our beliefs and our stories that really create our day-to-day lived experience and what it means to live well with this condition. And so if you want to check that out, you can do that at livingwellwithgastroparesis.com. You can click on resources and program. And Samantha, you are offering your group, Thriving with Gastroparesis group, which you talked about last episode, but you are also offering one-on-one coaching. Do you want to tell us where people can find out more about that?
So you can head to my website, which is transformative-psych.com, and on there, under services, you'll find my one-on-one coaching and also information on my Thriving with Gastroparesis community.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. We hope you found this episode helpful, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure you're subscribed over at thelivingwellpod.com so you'll get all future episodes and related content right in your inbox. We'll see you next time. The Living Well Pod is a production of Living Well Media.